Pets are a lot smarter than we think. It didn't take long for Pal to learn how to fetch. Thanks, but I don't need a stick. Really, Pal, I've got all the sticks I need. Hey, Dad! I just taught Pal to fetch! And then I trained him how to speak. What is it, boy? What are you trying to say? Hey, Mom! I just taught Pal how to say he's hungry! But looking back on it, I wonder if I was teaching him those things? Wag your tail! Wag your tail, Pal! Good doggy! Or if he was teaching me.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of ECL Presents. This is Will, and I have something very special to bring you today. It just so happened that Lucas was, I believe somebody may have slid into his DMs, or either way, a little birdie told him that there was a certain voice actor from the many years that Arthur has been on the air that wanted to speak with us. And so, thanks to this person's educational Zoom account, we were able to speak, he and I, just a few weeks ago. And this person is somebody that maybe you might not expect. I know that we've had a couple of interviews in the past of people who have been voices on the show, but this is somebody with perhaps the most important role that we've had so far. So I was able to speak for a while with Dallas Jokic, who you may know as one of the many voices of Arthur himself. Yeah, it was a great time, and I really hope that you enjoy this talk that we had. Dallas is a great guy, and I think that you're going to learn a little bit from what he has to say about his time on Arthur. I would also encourage you to follow him on Twitter at Dallas Jokic. Jokic spelled Jokic, at Dallas Jokic. He's a great guy. He's very kind with his time and funny too. And he's got a little bit of insight to tell us. Also want to give a big thanks to our patrons who not only were able to hear this interview first, but also supplied some of the questions that I went to during this interview. I really hope that you enjoy this. And I know that I don't do interviews as often as I would like to, so I appreciate your patience in that, and hopefully we can get more going sooner or later. In the meantime, here's another edition of ECL Presents, where we're speaking with one of the voices of Arthur, Dallas Jokic. Enjoy, everybody. If you don't mind, I'll kind of start by ramping up with your some of your credits, including your perhaps your most famous one. I mean, it's quite the list. It's appearing in such shows. Oh, you know what I should actually do is how do you pronounce your last name?
Jokic.
Jokic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good to know.
That's how my family says it. It's wrong, but that's how they say it.
Where is that from? What nationality is that?
It's Serbian, but my grandfather anglicized it when he came to Canada. So I'm always a little bit in conflict about how I should say it, but most of my family says Jokic. I have one cousin who says Jokic, but I'm currently with the most of the family in my pronunciation.
Gotcha. Okay, from such shows as Super Y, Caillou, Babar and the Adventures of Badu, and of course Arthur and Postcards from Buster, we are happy to talk to Dallas Jokic today. Arthur himself. Dallas, it's really great to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm so pleased that we were able to kind of make this connection, and you are actually the first Arthur that we've had on the show so far.
That's a very proud achievement for me.
I mean, this is a really cool opportunity because I mean, you were on the show. I think we've interviewed, of course, Arthur voice actors from the past. We've had Bruce Dinsmore on the show. We've interviewed Jessica Cardo, so they're still on the show. But you were you had one of the most central roles to a show like Arthur. So I'm really interested to get into, first of all, your involvement with acting. So are you originally from the Toronto area or the Ontario area?
Yeah, I'm from Markham originally.
Okay. So how did you originally get involved with acting? You've got a lot of voice acting credits, but I wondered if there was any other acting experience you had before and leading up to Arthur.
Yeah, so as a kid, I always wanted to do acting. I always begged my parents I wanted to be on Barney when I was a kid. That was my big thing. And then when I was in grade 6, I ended up it's a public school, but it had a good arts program. And a number of the kids there had agents and auditioned for things, for various TV shows, commercials, that kind of stuff. So I was able to get set up with an agent then. Her name's Miriam Vanderwerf. She still represents me, though I don't do much in the acting world anymore. And so I basically got sent to a number of auditions for both on camera and voice acting roles, and ended up, the first gig I got was this thing called, I think it was called like Tree House Kids, or I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically the voice for a toy. So it was a voice work thing where I actually voiced a physical toy. And
Wow.
anyways, that was sort of my entry into doing voice work. I think Super Y was the next thing after that, which was a great like children's sort of reading show. And so I ended up sort of finding this niche in voice work. And so that was my entry to it. So I didn't go in explicitly wanting to do voice work. But both my brother and I ended up kind of getting into that niche and getting some cool opportunities out of it. So I was around, I think I was in grade 7 when I first started doing Arthur, and that's also when most of my other credits happened.
I see. Were you familiar with Arthur before you auditioned for the role?
Yeah, like as a child, I would say I was like an Arthur super fan. There was a time when I used to watch Arthur 3 times a day. I would watch it in the morning, I'd go home for lunch and watch it on the TV while I had lunch, and then I'd watch it after school at the end of the day. So I was a huge Arthur fan. But it never really occurred to me the possibility of being on it.
Okay, that's perfect. I mean, I completely understand being an Arthur superfan. I was to the degree where I could I've memorized entire episodes somewhere up there. Not friends or family's birthdays, but entire episodes of Arthur. So I understand that process of it. So tell me about the process of securing that role. I'm really curious as to how that would have operated. Now, granted, this would have been over 10 years ago, but so you would have auditioned for it. Can you take me through a little bit of the process of what that looked like to eventually become Arthur?
Yeah, so it was kind of funny. I got an email from my agent, and she said that they were recasting both Arthur and the Brain on Arthur.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she submitted voice clips and said the goal is to sort of match these clips. And so I listened to them. I was kind of busy with school, something. And I said back to her, you know what? I don't sound like either of these parts. There's no point in auditioning. It seems cool, but I'm kind of busy this week. I'm just going to pass on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember she called me, I believe it was a call, and she said, I know you sound like Arthur. I know you don't think you do, but I know you do, so you need to audition for this.
Right.
So I believe I recorded an audition first, though I might have gone in person. I can't remember. And anyways, I auditioned for both of these parts, the Brain and Arthur. And then I ended up getting a call back for Arthur, recorded a couple things. They played clips of the previous Arthur to me, and just tried my best to match it, and eventually ended up getting offered the role. And so I started recording it.
Logistically speaking, where did you do your recordings?
It was I actually don't remember exactly where it was because I was a kid and didn't know Toronto at all.
Of course. Yeah.
But I went into a studio and recorded, I think at the most, when I did Arthur, I would record once a week. And I think it was every Friday. And they generally were relatively short recordings. I worked on other shows where I'd be, there for 8-hour days recording. Arthur, even on busy days, they moved really fast. It would be, a 2-hour record would be on the longer end.
Okay. We did have a question from one of our patrons about the voice recording schedule. So done in a quick succession. And I think, am I to understand, you can maybe confirm or deny this or whichever. The recording schedule, you would be doing seasons like ahead of time, like would it be multiple seasons of episodes?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly. So I think that if you look at the record now, I was Arthur for 4 seasons. When we
Yes.
recorded it, it was only 2 seasons, and they were like 20 episode seasons, but then they ended up releasing them as shorter 10 episode seasons.
Hmm.
So I think I recorded like 2 seasons sort of together at the same time. So I think I did 12 and 13 and then 14 or 15 or something like that.
Right, and on this kind of Friday schedule of a couple of hours at a time.
That's my recollection. And I feel like there were sort of two different periods, like two different blocks where I did it, if I'm not mistaken. But again, it was a while ago, so I don't quite remember.
Of course. I mean, I think it's worth noting, what was kind of what was your age range when you were recording these?
So I started when I was in grade 7. So I don't know exactly how old that would make me. I think I was probably 12 or something like that when I started.
Sure.
And I finished in grade 9. So yeah, it was over like the course of basically 2 years.
So from junior high to the very beginning of high school.
That's right.
I see. That's interesting. I almost would have guessed that. I mean, I guess it's probably just projecting Arthur into the voice actor role, but I just imagine that you would have maybe been a bit younger. But you were kind of in the preteen age range when you would have been playing him.
Yeah, that's right. And then I stopped when my voice started to change and I couldn't do it anymore. I remember a few, maybe a month or two of really difficult recordings when my voice was just not that high anymore. And that was when they needed to recast.
Did you have to do any particular magic tricks to kind of get to that register?
I think by the end I was needing to do like more vocal warm-ups and stuff in the morning because it was, so if you listen to the progression of Arthurs, which I don't know if you know, there's a whole online ranking of the Arthurs, message boards. I've been ranked the second worst Arthur before, which is another proud achievement.
Oh my gosh.
And so anyways, like it started a lot lower and huskier, like the Michael Yarmouth era.
Mm-hmm.
I think his name is. His era was a little deeper and huskier. And then by the time it got to me, the voice had kind of creeped up. So it was very high by the time I was sort of matching the voice. So it was a bit of a challenge, but it was really just doing it like a relatively high voice. And there wasn't a ton of other extra stuff I needed to do.
I'll be honest, I haven't run across, I believe that these rankings exist, but we haven't run across anything like that. We are actually just about to finish the 10th season. So in about sometime next year, we're going to be running into your Arthur. But I mean, my goodness, the second worst Arthur. I'm sorry you had to kind of go through that. But you're right. As the kind of the show went along, that's a good way to describe it. The voice kind of creeped up in pitch. So that would have been, really difficult. I can think about myself in junior high. That was right around the time that my voice was changing too. So it was a little higher to hit that higher register.
Absolutely.
We had another question from a patron and just talking about your favorite memories of working on the show. I know I understand it can be hard to remember these years ago, but do you have any especially positive memories of any of your time with your fellow cast members or just fun sessions or anything like that?
I remember really enjoying going to recordings. I don't have a ton of particular memories. So the way that Arthur was recorded is I always recorded on my own. So I met a couple of the other performers, but I never really worked with anyone or recorded with anyone on Arthur. This might be a bit of a pivot away from Arthur, but I do have some very specific memories of working on Babar. And the one that really stands out to me is Gordon Pinsett, who was King Babar, sort of legendary Canadian actor.
Yes.
I got to record a lot of my episodes with him, and he was incredibly, he's still working and an incredibly charming and boisterous and generous guy. And I remember one recording, he was sort of scribbling when we were recording. And then at the end, he handed me like a little sketch he had done of me, which I still have. So that wasn't Arthur, but that was a show where I got to work with a lot of the actors that I was playing against. So it went a little longer, but I have some more sort of distinct memories of that. I also did that one for a bit longer.
Okay. Yes, that's one of the more robust entries in your IMDb, which I kind of had to cross-reference with Wikipedia and everything coming into the interview. But I did want to get into that a little bit in terms of your life post voice acting, at least, like let's say post IMDb. But so there was a period of time where you were on a lot of the shows that we mentioned. You were the voice of Arthur for a number of years, and then that seems to be it from the IMDb side of things, but
Mhm.
I am curious as to what kind of happened at that point after you were finished with Arthur, which is your most recent credit, or actually Postcards from Buster is your most recent credit. Did you leave acting for a little bit, or what happened at that point in your life?
So I did a bunch of theater in high school. I was like a big theater kid, did a
Okay.
bunch of shows every year, and I really enjoyed that and kind of prioritized that. I also just once your voice kind of changes as a voice actor, you kind of go into this time when you're really not very marketable for the most part, because
Mhm.
if they're looking for someone to play a teenager, they'll generally cast someone a little older.
Right.
And so I didn't really prioritize my career. It was something I enjoyed doing, but it wasn't ever a priority for me.
Mhm.
So I really focused on high school, doing a lot of theater. The last gig I did was actually an episode of a Christmas special to Franklin. So my
Okay.
brother was the voice of Franklin for a number of years. And so I was able to do this episode where I played kind of an older brother character to Franklin, which was kind of cool. We actually ended up, I don't know if I should say this, but we later found the recording of that years later, and they had not told my brother, but they had recast him in that episode, because I think that was on the edge of his voice changing. So there's this thing, my brother and I recorded that all together, had this amazing experience, and then it exists, but it is me and someone else that I never met,
Yeah.
which is kind of funny. So anyways, that was the last gig that I did, which was a really fun experience. And then I considered going on to pursue theater and acting and that kind of stuff, but I ended up deciding to more go in the academia route. So I did my undergrad at University of Guelph, and I studied history and philosophy, and now I'm kind of I did my master's in philosophy a couple years ago at Queen's, and now I'm doing my PhD at McGill, also in philosophy. So I've kind of gone into the academia route and left behind performing.
Okay. In terms of speaking about performing, I guess I'd like to just ask you what's the biggest positive that you get from performing, and whether it's voice acting or theatrical performance. What was it that really spoke to you at the time, and even still speaks to you about, why it would be something you would study and return to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it changed for me. I think early when I started doing performing and getting into musicals, I just really loved being on stage, and I really loved the sort of vibe you get from performing with other people. As I moved on, I started to find the kind of more in high school, I got very into theater and like acting theory and that kind of stuff in a very pretentious way, and found that really rewarding. And that kind of led me into the more philosophy world. And so I've kind of stepped away from theater, but I do find before the pandemic started, I had signed up just for an improv class to get doing some stuff again for fun. And I found it really, I'm someone who tends to live in my head a lot. And so having something where you're just sort of out performing, doing something was kind of a relief for me. And so I find that the way it kind of works against my general tendency, which is to be in my own head, is one of the elements of it that I appreciate and to some extent I miss.
Okay. I'd like to know a little bit about what you've been up to as recently as this year. So you mentioned you're at McGill right now in a PhD program, and you've kind of, dipped your toe back in a little bit into improv and that sort of thing. What are you looking to do? I mean, this would normally be the part of just like, if you have anything that you want to promote that you're a part of, or anything that you would kind of want to get the word out about, but also just like, how you doing these days? What are you focusing the most on?
Yeah, so during my master's, I've been studying over the last few years a lot of the far right movement and understanding where it comes from, and like contemporary fascist movements, which I know is a bit of a far cry from Arthur, but here we are. And so I wrote my thesis on the emergence of fascist and far right movements in Canada in relation to settler colonialism. And my work in my PhD is sort of continuing on some of that research, but I'm working with the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who is a rationalist philosopher, and sort of working with his philosophy to develop some political analysis for where far-right movements come from. So that's kind of the work I'm doing right now.
That's really fascinating. And I mean, you may be pleased to know that it's not as far removed from Arthur as you may think. The Arthur team, at least this year, has been putting together some really terrific content aimed at kids, but also meant to combat, racism and like anti-racism videos. And there was one recently about wearing a mask, which unfortunately can get into political territory these days when you involve the far right movement and stuff like that. So it is good to know, at least I've said this kind of on the podcast, that Arthur still seems to be a force for positivity, number one, but also it's almost a little bit like maybe children's first introduction to more left-leaning ideals, or at least more like community focused ideals, which of course is what is still appealing about Arthur these days.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do think that's why it, as a show, I think really holds up and holds such a warm place in so many of our hearts, because it I think has often been sort of on the right side of history, for lack of a better term.
I am curious. I know that this is I've asked this before, and it's kind of a weird question because I used to work in radio too, and it's just like, oh, do you ever get noticed? I'm like, well, no. But do you have anybody in your life who like knows that you were Arthur? Like, have you ever had a reaction to that from other people?
Yes, definitely. It's one of those things that inevitably, if I tell anybody about this thing, or somebody Googles me and finds my IMDb page, it starts to spread around, and everyone enjoys to bring it up as a fun fact at parties and that kind of stuff. But it definitely calmed down a little. I remember in high school, it would be a huge thing. Everyone would freak out. And of course, overreact in a very high school way. But these days it's a little more casual. But it is one of those things that when people find out, they love to ask about and bring up. And that's fun. So so I don't get generally recognized by strangers, but it doesn't take long of me being in a certain environment for someone to find out. So it definitely comes up perennially.
You mentioned it a little bit. Did your relationship with that change over the years? Like, was there ever a time where that wasn't such a positive thing to get that attention, or or was it always kind of like a more on the positive side, being recognized, so to speak, as Arthur?
It's never been a real problem. I think that there was a while that I thought that me bringing it up would be perceived as me bragging or something like that. Whereas it's kind of gotten to a point now where I can just bring it up and people are like, oh, that's funny. As opposed to it seeming like me being like, it's cool, I was Arthur.
You never use that as like a pickup line or something?
That is something I get asked a lot. I have not thus far.
I know it's probably not like the sexiest thing you can put out there, but no, it could work for somebody. Yeah. And of course, we have to ask. So of course, you were quite young when you were on Arthur, and even younger when you were, watching it on TV. But the listeners, the patrons, the fans alike, very curious. Do you have a favorite Arthur character? And if possible, do you have a favorite Arthur episode that sticks in your head?
So I don't know that I have a favorite character. I'd have to really think about that one a little longer. And in terms of episodes, I don't know if I'd say this is a favorite, but the one that sticks in my head and haunts me to this day is the Jekyll and Hyde episode. And that song, whenever I'm a little freaked out, it's getting dark, I'm alone in the house, the Jekyll, Jekyll, Hyde, Hyde, Jekyll definitely enters my mind.
I think you are you're in good company with that. There's a lot of people that still return to that. We did a Twitter thing recently of like, what's your favorite Arthur episode? And a lot of people were just like, oh, the one with all the music videos in it. So that's very well remembered all these years later. I might get you to maybe Twitter DM your favorite character after you've had a bit of a think about it. Sure. But I appreciate that you didn't just go to, oh, of course it's Arthur. Why wouldn't it be Arthur?
No, I don't think Arthur's the most interesting character.
No, well, fair enough.
I'll take out that position.
Well, Dallas, it was really good to speak with you. And of course, a lot of people very curious about what it was like to be part of that process, what it was like to be part of the Arthur process, and what you've been up to since. And it seems that in a way, performing still in your mind as well. But I think I'd like to think that the majority of the audience listening to this appreciates that you're kind of using your energy to try and understand and figure out one of the more fraught parts of humanity these days. At least I do. I think that's super interesting, and I appreciate anybody who kind of devotes their time to trying to figure that out and more.
Well, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Yeah, well, Dallas, great to meet you again. I'm humbled to be in the presence of Arthur, and we really can't wait to hear about you on the show. And of course, we'll be a little bit kind. I don't know, second worst Arthur voice or anything like that. We'll try and soften the blow. I really can't wait to hear you though. I'm sure you're great.
You can be honest with me. I value whatever input you have.
Fair enough. Well, that's Dallas Jokic, the former voice of Arthur. He will be forever remembered. There's a Wikipedia article, and there's not one for me. So I'm humbled to be here with you, and thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.